Hello and welcome to Train News, and now for today's top story. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has confirmed that David Frankel will be stripped of the Train News franchise because he keeps failing to upload episodes on time. Oh shit. And our first story is the end of Virgin trains on the West Coast Mainline after 22 years, with the new franchise owned by First and Trenitalia taking over in December. Avanti West Coast will run the West Coast Mainline until at least 2031. The existing fleet has currently been retained, but from 2022 onwards, new Class 802 bi-modes will enter service, replacing the super voyages between London and Chester and North Wales, and also supplementing the Pendolino fleet on services between London and Scotland via Birmingham. The trains will be a mix of 5 and 7 car units, the 7 car Class 802 supposedly having the same capacity as a 9 car Pendolino train. The Pendolinos themselves will be fully refurbished. Avanti West Coast will operate the first trains on HS2 Phase 1 using classic compatible trains. As part of the new franchise, a direct London to Llandudno service is set to return. There's also set to be a direct service to Walsall, and the occasional Wrexham service is set to be extended to Gabowen. But David, I hear you ask, Class 802s don't tilt. Well, I'd like to point you to an interesting article by rail engineer Gareth Dennis, which looks into the topic of tilting trains and whether or not they are still needed on the UK rail network. But to summarise, it basically says that with much better train acceleration and deceleration and some minor track engineering, we can basically get to a point already where tilting trains are no longer needed for trains to be able to reach 125 miles an hour on the West Coast Mainline. In fact, TransPennine Express's new fleet, which I'll talk about in a bit, does exactly that north of Preston. This puts to bed a long argument about whether or not the classic compatible HS2 fleet should be built with tilting capability, and I think the answer to that is now a very clear and definite no. Speaking of HS2, leaks from the ongoing Oakervie report seem to suggest continued support for the project, but the final publication of the report has been delayed due to the general election. Not all the news regarding HS2 is good news, however. In September, the Department for Transport warned that Phase 1 of HS2 might be delayed by up to 5 years from 2026 up to 2031, with Phase 2 currently due to be completed in 2033, potentially being delayed up to 2040. The anti-HS2 brigade, supported by the unlikely alliance of the Brexit Party and the Green Party, want to capitalise on these delays to basically argue to scrap the entire project. Obviously, they're completely and utterly wrong to do so, but I won't get into that right now. Meanwhile, there have also been some unofficial proposals to try and scale down the project to save costs. One sort of low-hanging fruit that many people are targeting is the eastern leg of the Y network, i.e. Birmingham to Leeds via the East Midlands. Some people are suggesting that you should cancel that and instead use Northern Powerhouse Rail to serve Leeds via Manchester. This is an absolutely terrible idea. First of all, it totally abandons Nottingham and Sheffield and completely removes the benefits of HS2 for the Midland Main Line. And second of all, it is a massive waste of capacity on the new Northern Powerhouse route between Manchester and Leeds, as well as, of course, cross-Manchester capacity by basically rerouting 2 whole markets of passengers, London to Leeds and Birmingham to Leeds, neither of which currently go anywhere near Manchester, to go through Manchester. Northern Powerhouse Rail is going to cost a lot of money to build, and the capacity that it releases should be used for east-west passengers travelling between Liverpool and Manchester to Leeds and beyond. That capacity should not be wasted on London-bound passengers who have absolutely no business being anywhere near there. It's completely backwards thinking. And all of that would just save a measly £10 billion on an £88 billion project. Thankfully, there's been no suggestion that the government support this proposal, nor is there any suggestion of it from the leak of the Oakervie report, so let's hope it stays that way. I am of course planning to do a longer piece about HS2 and why I think it should be built, but since the Oakervie report has been delayed, I will delay that video until the Oakervie report is released. TransPennine Express now has all 3 of its new fleets in service. The Nova 1, aka the Class 802, the Nova 2, aka the Class 397 Civity, and the Nova 3, aka the Mark 5 sets hauled by Class 68s. The Nova 2s, which are dedicated to the West Coast Mainline Scotland services, were the last to enter service, and naturally, I was on one of them on the very first day of service. These are replacing the Class 350s, the first 4 of which have already been sent down to London North Western. Here's a naked Class 350 at Manchester Piccadilly, having had its livery removed in advance of being sent down south. On the other end of the north of England rolling stock spectrum, I am delighted to announce that the first series of Pacer trains has finally gone for scrap. However, it has been confirmed that some Pacer trains will remain in service until at least May 2020. I'm sticking by the prediction I made in the last episode that the last Pacer won't go until December 2020. We'll have to wait and see. A much more honourable fleet exit has been the HST sets, also known as the Intercity 125s, which have finally bowed out of service on the East Coast Mainline earlier this month. To celebrate the occasion, one set was re-liveried into British Rail Blue. Class 442s were temporarily withdrawn from South Western Railways after it emerged they were messing with line-side signals. Viva Rail D-stock trains are set to replace the 1938 tube stock trains on the Isle of Wight from summer 2020 onwards, which means if I want to ride on one of the old tube trains, I better kick my ass into gear and go and visit the Isle of Wight. Grand Union, aka Alliance Rail, the kings of politely requesting to run open access services and never quite getting open access to actually run them, have proposed a new open access service from London to Stirling via the West Coast Mainline, using Intercity 225 sets. The company's other currently pending proposal is a new service from London Paddington to Cardiff Central, also using Intercity 225 sets, at first, later to be replaced by new Class 802s, at which point the service will be extended onwards to Llanelli. Then let's talk about the December 2019 timetable change. The headline change is TransPennine Express's new direct Liverpool to Glasgow service, which has been delayed by about a year. These are using the new Nova 2 trains. It's currently 3 direct services per day, though this should increase next year. At the same time, the service from Liverpool through Manchester and Leeds to Newcastle has now been extended all the way north to Edinburgh via the East Coast Mainline. However, due to delayed introduction of the Nova 1 and 3 fleets, some of these trains have now been cancelled in their entirety until January 2020. It must be very frustrating if you're travelling from, say, Liverpool to Leeds to have your service suddenly get temporarily worse rather than improved. Elsewhere, some TransPennine Express services to Middlesbrough have been extended through to Redcar Central. Also, one minor change is that the Manchester to Huddersfield shuttle has now picked up all local callings between Stalybridge and Huddersfield, with the Manchester Hull services now running fast. This solves an issue that many people raised with the May 2018 timetable change when the northern service on that line was withdrawn and the local callings like Slowett and Greenfield were suddenly split up between different services, making it 1, very difficult to travel between those two stations, and 2, making it much more likely that those station callings would be dropped when fast trains try to make up time. Personally, I've always found the solution to this to be extremely obvious, which is exactly why I suggested exactly that when I was talking about the May 2018 timetable change being introduced. TransPennine Express have introduced a new hourly Manchester Piccadilly to Leeds shuttle service, but rather than having this shuttle service call at all 4 stations between Stalybridge and Huddersfield, the 4 intermediate stations are instead being shared out between the shuttle service and the Hull service, with the shuttle service covering Greenfield and Marsden, and the Hull service is covering Mossley and Slowett, meaning that you can no longer travel from Greenfield to Mossley or from Marsden to Slowett outside of peak times, which is pretty inconvenient if you live there. It's also pretty inconvenient for people who live in Hull who've lamented that their service has been downgraded with all these extra station callings. So why didn't they just have the shuttle service call all 4 stations? I feel like that would have been better for everybody. It may have taken a year and a half, but at least common sense has finally prevailed, at least between Stalybridge and Huddersfield. Moving on to Northern, where the Alderley Edge to Wigan service has now been extended through to Southport all day, restoring Southport's all-day connections with Manchester Oxford Road and Manchester Piccadilly. This was another contentious issue with the May 2018 timetable, which also had another very obvious solution that makes it mind-blowing that it took this long for them to figure it out. At the same time, Kirkby has regained its direct service to Manchester Victoria, whilst the Leeds to Southport service has been curtailed at Wigan. The Leeds to Selby service has been extended in both directions, becoming a Harrogate to Hull service. On London North Western, the recently introduced London Euston to Birmingham Walsall Rugeley Trent Valley service has been proven a bit of a pain to operate, and so from December, roughly half of those trains will be curtailed at Walsall. At the same time, the current Wolverhampton to Birmingham to Walsall service will be extended through to Rugeley Trent Valley to compensate. From May 2020 onwards, the Chase line will lose direct services to London Euston entirely, having only gained them last May. I must say, I for one am completely shocked. Greater Anglia have introduced a new direct service from Norwich to Stansted Airport, and LNER are now running Azumas to Lincoln and Harrogate, the latter gaining a full service to London from December. The timetable change saw two brand new railway stations opening, Warrington West and Roboyston in Scotland. Worcestershire Parkway was also set to open, but this has now been delayed until next year. That's where the Birmingham to Bristol line crosses the Cotswolds route. Redcar British Steel railway station has been mothballed, joining the list of stations with no services that are not officially closed, alongside Manchester United Football Club, IBM, Bollaston, Wedgwood and Newhaven Marine. And finally, on the Great Western Mainline, there have been more services introduced between London and Bristol. The full planned London to Bristol timetable will be launched in May 2020. TfL Rail, the precursor to Crossrail, are now running services from London Paddington to Reading using the new Class 345s. Class 360s are still being used on the services to Heathrow. These will be replaced with Class 345s from next year. Finally, let's look to Europe. Direct Eurostar services from Amsterdam to London are finally due to begin in April this year. Since 2018, services have been running direct from London to Amsterdam, but passengers from Amsterdam to London have had to change in Brussels due to a lack of passport checking agreement between the UK and the Netherlands. The number of Eurostar trains between the two cities is also set to be gradually increased to 5 trains per day over the next few years, with rail reportedly having captured 23% of the market share on that route already. Eurostar and Thalys could merge under a proposed merger known as Greenspeed. This opens up the possibility of Eurostar running direct services from London to Germany. Obviously, Deutsche Bahn had previously expressed interest in running that route, but had dropped its proposals over the difficulties of getting UK border security agents to check passports at German railway stations. As I've said many times before, all of these problems could be solved by just amending the UK border rules to allow the UK border agents to just check all passengers on arrival in London St Pancras, which is basically the system we have in every UK airport. And for people worried that this would compromise border security, no, it would actually make border security safer because it closes the so-called Lille loophole. This is when passengers with tickets from Brussels to Lille board the Eurostar trains in Brussels and then just stay on the train past Lille into London. Since they're not checked on arrival in London, they just get off the train. Under a checking on arrivals system, all passengers would be checked on arrival at London St Pancras, making it impossible to bypass border security this way. And it makes it so much easier to introduce new direct services from London to other destinations across the continent. Something that, now that we all agree there's a climate emergency, should really be a priority. FLIXTRAIN, the open access rail sibling of Flixbus, is trying to enter the French rail market. It has proposed new low-cost services between Paris and Brussels, Paris and Toulouse, Paris and Bordeaux, and Paris and Lyon via the Classic rather than the LGV lines. This would be the first time that TGV services have had real competition on their core routes. Obviously, FLIXTRAIN would be competing on price rather than speed, so this really puts the WeGo experiment to the test. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Oh, and before I go, I should probably just address some rumours that have been flying about, started by the Department for Transport itself, that the Transport Secretary may or may not make a decision to strip Northern of their franchise for very poor performance. Now, to be specific, Grant Shapps said he might end the current contract. That doesn't necessarily mean stripping Northern of their franchise. It might mean giving them a new short-term franchise until a new franchise can be picked. So this doesn't necessarily mean that Northern will be renationalised, although it is definitely on the table. But there is still a chance that nothing will happen at all. From what I understand, a final decision on this is set to be made over the next few weeks, so that's definitely one to watch. Well, there you have it. That was train news. Next episode should be out in around early April. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.